Mary mentioning the staging challenge. Can you break it down for us how this is holding back Open Alpha? So I interpret staging as a preliminary loading of data similar to buffering. Is this close? Looking for a more technical view, but in layman's terms. And are we talking too much lag in the network still?
Right. So let's just start out. I think we mean staging a little differently. Staging is simply our word for the integrated environment that we do the last stage of testing in just prior to releasing to the more widely public host network of Holo ports. So that to our test net, to our alpha test net. I have a picture here. I'm not sure if we're showing it, but basically it kind of gives our different environments that we use essentially for development and testing. There's the local dev environments really, because that can be a lot of different places because we're integrating code from multiple teams. We've got, our HoloChain core team. Sometimes they've got multiple repos that they're working from and multiple types of code that they're bringing in. Then we also have our Happy team who's building the apps and the UIs, and we also have our Holo Central team that has the HPOS software and other automations. And so all of these come together in dev test integrated environments where that's where developers are kind of going, well, I need to see how this runs with one of the other team's code. And so that's the first place where we see some integration. But really, we have the next level of integration, which is what we're calling integrated QA environment. And that's the first time where all of it comes together. As we move from developer testing, we have to be really careful with how we continue to test in subsequent environments, because really we need new, Arthur was kind of talking about this a little bit, we need new hash spaces so that for each app, it really is a new holochain network or DHT. Also, as it gets into this integrated QA environment, which is the third one in our list of 5, it's the first time where we have the most up-to-date code coming from all of the teams integrated into an end-to-end testable system. It's really at that point that we're running both the functional tests and the stress tests on HoloChain and on the HAPs. And it's where we're gathering the release notes that we can use to communicate what's included, what's new, and that, so that when we take it to the next environment, which is what I'm calling our staging environment, this is kind of the field test with a subset of community testers and other team testers, so that they know what they're doing, so that they start getting a view into what it is they're going to be writing about, how it is that they're going to be supporting the functionality if they're working on our help desk, as an example, or providing guidance out on the forum. And then, I said something here about going back to fixes. Right. Well, this is where we pull all the code in, especially like if you think about HoloChain. Somebody had asked earlier about the HoloChain release process. So when we get to our integrated QA environment, we're not even on a version of HoloChain that's blessed yet. So we're not on the most recent public version of HoloChain. So right when we're in that QA environment, HoloChain's still going through a parallel process of going through their stress tests and meeting all of their requirements so that they can work for the distributed app users as well. And then all of that comes together when we get to the staging environment, where we actually do the build on the blessed version of HoloChain here, and we make it available to that subset of community testers. And that's where we sort of do a preview prior to taking it to more of the public testnet, or eventually what will become a mainnet. So it's complex. And what I was talking about around the challenge really gets at, is our networking configuration, is our SIM2H configuration at each stage set up the way that it needs to be? There's a couple of different issues around, or variables, and Arthur, you might be able to speak to these a little bit more in depth about how SIM2H needs to be set up in each distinct environment. But specifically in each one, we need to have a new hash space or a new DHT, and we need to make sure that we're not having crossover. That is, people who were working with the same node in the QA environment can't just move over into the staging environment because their source chain that's how you can basically get the corrupt data, is that if they're carrying basically transactions on their source chain or entries on their source chain from one environment that then can't be validated through the gossiping in the next environment, that's where we're going to run into problems, where we have validation errors. And those validation errors are good errors, actually. That's how holochain's intended to work. We don't want there to be able to be that sort of crossover. We need to be able to go, oh, no, that's an inappropriate node coming into our network, and it shouldn't keep working. Yes. Go ahead, Arthur. I think it's...
Yeah, I was just going to clarify. I mean, essentially, because of the way when you set up a new node, but you're using the same agent key as you used in the last environment where you did a bunch of transactions, right? Then that's sort of equivalent to rolling back your chain, or in cryptocurrency terms, trying to double spend, right? So Holochain actually does fail to let you do that successfully, which it's supposed to do, right? But when you didn't know that that was what you were doing, because you thought you were starting out in kind of a clean space, but you didn't make sure you were in a clean space, and you instead used the same key and started over, but a bunch of other nodes already know about transactions you've done, then they're rightfully saying, hey, there's a problem here because you aren't validating these transactions you've done. And so, yeah.
So that was the staging challenge. And so that's what I'm calling more our deployment process and DevOps process challenge that we've been running into. But it's been super informative. Like I said, the learnings are what we're pulling out and distilling, trying to figure out ways to communicate that, because everybody who's building HAPs, if they start doing testing that's more complex, they're going to run into these same things.
Yeah.